Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second edition of Beta Speaks. Tonight, we are going to be discussing the wave of anti-transgender legislation that swept through the country. There are many myths, misconceptions, and misinformation put out, and we have some very special guests tonight to break down this misinformation and answer some questions. I will be your host for the evening. My name is Soro Daiquiri Roan. I'm the National Social Justice Coordinator for Beta Phi Omega Sorority Incorporated, a member of the Beta Mu chapter in Nashville, Tennessee, and on the Board of Governors with the Human Rights Campaign. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our three panelists. We have HRC Litigation Director Jason Starr, HRC Director of Trans Justice Initiative Tori Cooper, and HRC Director of Strategic Outreach and Engagement Nick Harris. And I'll let them give them a brief introduction, but welcome.
Thank you so much. Hey.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
That introduction worked for me.
Exactly.
Topic, we could jump in.
Let's get into it.
Well, 2021 has been a record-breaking year for anti-transgender legislation affecting our trans youth the most. More than 30 states introduced legislation that targets trans residents. 5 states have passed laws or implemented executive orders this year limiting the ability of transgender youth to play sports or receive certain medical treatment. In my state of Tennessee, there were 12 such bills, and 5 anti-transgender laws were enacted after the legislative season ended. One of those bills, the business bathroom bill, was blocked by a federal judge. This law would have required some businesses to post signs outside of their doors if they allow transgender or non-binary customers to use a bathroom that corresponds to their gender identity. But this was just a short-term victory. But we're going to cut to a brief video to introduce the trans legislation that's sweeping the country and hear from some of our community members.
People like these legislators are creating a very scary time for the trans community where I just don't feel safe.
There are folks out there who would like to legislate away the existence of transgender people like me. These laws are particularly targeting trans youth, denying participation in sports, denying access to medically necessary life-saving healthcare.
Hi, I'm Jacob, and I'm 11 years old and transgender. This means that my sex assigned at birth is female, but I identify and am a boy.
My hopes for Jacob's future are that he can live unburdened by the struggle that we're going through now, that he can live where he wants, he can go to school where he wants, he can have the career that he chooses, he can raise a family in any state and not have to worry about being discriminated against.
My daughter, Gia, came out just before her 13th birthday. She's now 17, about to graduate from high school. And she has been a leader in her school, in her clubs, in sports. When I think about all of these bills that are coming out in state legislatures, I can't help but think of a time when Black people faced similar discrimination and codes, and women did not have rights and also faced discrimination.
Today, we have, for the first time in 4 years, a president and a vice president who are saying unequivocally, trans rights are human rights. We have a House that passed the Equality Act.
We do need legal protection, but we also do need the kinds of protection that the law can't reach, and that's the heart.
One thing I think that we really need to do better at is telling the full stories of trans lives. You're very rarely seeing the stories of just everyday lives. We need to see more of that.
Representation is extremely important because a lot of people like to embody and emulate people that they look up to. For example, looking up to people like Laverne Cox has really impacted my life. It's made me see that I can make a huge impact on this earth as well.
As her mother, as a member of her family, we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that this world is a better and safer place for our Gia.
We need more people to call their senators, their House members. We need more people to call their state lawmakers and speak out against these anti-trans actions. What trans youth want to do, they want to go to school, they want to play sports, they want to be on a team, they want to go to the doctor and be able to get the kind of care that they deserve. No matter how much you try to legislate against us, we are still going to be here.
Video.
Well, hearing from those voices, it really hits home for me. It's easy for us to get up here and talk about how it affects the community, but hearing from the students and the parents that it directly affects, it really hits home. In August, the Human Rights Campaign or the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, they filed a federal lawsuit in the District Court of Middle Tennessee, challenging one of the laws that was passed. This law would have denied transgender students and faculty and staff access to the bathroom, locker room, and other segregated facilities consistent with their gender identity. Before we get into tonight, I wanted to just read a quick passage from one of the students involved in one of the lawsuits and their parents. This is from a child named Alex. When I started 7th grade, I wanted to blend in. Having to use a special bathroom made me stand out because other kids would wonder why I didn't just use the boys' bathroom. It was also a pain because the bathrooms I was allowed to use were not close to any of my classrooms, so I just stopped having anything to drink during the day. It stresses me out that I'll have to deal with this all over again at my new school. And then his parents had to say, we didn't know we had a trans child when we relocated to Tennessee. If Alex had come out to us before we moved, we wouldn't have come here. It makes me so angry that our elected officials have chosen to target trans kids. If lawmakers were to take the time to get to know my son, they would see that he is an amazing, smart, caring, creative person who has so much to offer. Alex just wants to be a regular kid. He should be able to look forward to starting high school without the added layer of anxiety about something as basic as using the bathroom. So we have some common myths that we want to discuss tonight and break down. The first one is the myth that transgender women and girls have an unfair advantage in sports. And any of our panelists can jump off with that one. I think you agree.
Tori, can y'all hear Tori?
No.
Tori, I just realized, it's a sound issue, and I know it's beautiful what's coming out. Like, no, Are you on Chrome? Are you on Chrome? Did you use Chrome through the link? Try doing.
Well, I'll pick up where Miss Tori left off, and just start by saying, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you for hosting a conversation, like this, and I'm really excited to really myth bust, and I'm glad we're starting here because I think, we talk about these laws often as solutions in search of a problem that create more problems. And I think what these elected officials and this, cabal and cadre of political conservatives have done in their effort to just erase trans people and trans identity from existence is really to, curry in falsehoods and myths because a lot of their constituents, at least they believe, don't know or don't have experience and exposure to trans people and trans identity. And so they're feeding, ignorance essentially. And so, the myth that, transgender women and girls take opportunities away from cisgender women and girls in athletics just isn't true. One, none of the legislators and electeds who were pushing these bills are able to cite to any examples of decreased athletic participation and access to sports. 15 states before this year and the District of Columbia and DC had policies that allowed trans women and girls, trans people to compete in sports consistent with their gender identity. And as did the NCAA, the International Olympic Committee. And these are policies that have been in place for decades. And what we've seen actually in states that have these policies, research shows that participation in women's athletics in those states actually increased for cisgender and transgender women. So it looks as though when we are more affirmatively inclusive in our policies, when we make provision for and recognize that we're expanding eligibility by making sure that trans women and girls, that trans people are able to participate and access sports consistent with their gender identity, that rising tide actually lifts all boats. And that's particularly important in women's sports, where the effort is to make sure that women's sports get the same funding, attention, resources, space, opportunities for travel, et cetera, as men's sports. So we're doing the work of Title IX and increasing opportunity by actually having policies that recognize that trans women and girls should be able to compete with their peers on women and girls sports teams.
Tori, I was gonna hand it over to you and see if it's working now.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you. Yes.
Okay.
Tori in the house.
All right. First, let me start off with an apology because we're late because of me, and I apologize for that. But it's good to see everyone. But with that being said, I will call bullshit what it is. It's bullshit. It's total bullshit. Sports are not fair. Sports are intrinsically not fair. How tall are you, Nick?
Don't put me out like that. But 5'4".
I'm 5'11". The truth is, you and I could be on opposing basketball teams or the same team and play against each other. That's not fair. It's not fair because it's more likely that you will be a better dribbler because you're closer to the ground, and I will be maybe a better dunker because I'm taller to the hoop. That's not fair. And yet, that's sports. Sports aren't fair because Brittany Griner does not make the same money as Blake Griffin. Diana Taurasi does not make the same amount of money for doing the exact same work as LeBron James does. So sports are not fair. So when people use that argument, it's bullshit, and we should call it what it is. There is a loud minority of folks who are attempting to push this absolutely ridiculous narrative. The trans people are out to take something that belongs to someone else, and that's not the truth. That's not the truth. Our goal is not to take away from folks. Our goal is simply to find a place for ourselves in society, to integrate more into systems that obviously were not built for us. And looking at the four of our faces, none of these systems that we have to navigate were built for us anyway.
Right.
Well, you speaking truth on that. We can just, that's it right there. Amen. Thank you for that point, Tori.
Well, the second myth we want to break down is gender affirming care for transgender youth is dangerous.
Healthcare is care. And the idiocy is that, again, this loud minority of people, it's not, we saw statistics that say 70% of folks, of the populace, of the population support the Equality Act and what it represents. And so there's a small, loud minority of folks who are saying that a parent should not just be penalized, but should also be perhaps locked up in prison for providing health care the best, the most comprehensive healthcare for their children. They're a small loud minority. That's exactly right, Latoya. And so we have to call it what it is. It's bullshit. But we have to also understand that healthcare in itself is designed to take care of people. Again, it is not an equitable system. There is no equality in healthcare systems, and healthcare systems were not created for people who look like us or who have our DNA. But healthcare itself the intent behind healthcare was to make people well. And so if the goal is to make people well or keep people whole or keep people well or keep them from getting sick or to eradicate sickness, to eradicate illness, and to bring about wellness, then we have to understand that trans-affirming care does that. It brings about wellness. It brings about wholeness. And for that loud minority of folks that are pushing this absolutely dreadful agenda, they're saying that healthcare is not important, and just the opposite. Healthcare is wrong. That does not make sense.
It doesn't. I'll also add this. If we're being honest, the hypocrisy of it, right? So they are literally simultaneously, I could go walk in there right now, turn on the news, and you have people arguing, some of these same people arguing that parents should decide whether their kids get vaccines, wear a mask, but somehow they can't make decisions about healthcare for their children, which is ridiculous. And let's be clear, because a lot of times when people hear this, they're not aware of what's happening. I can speak for me in the state of Florida. The last 2 years now, they tried to criminalize doctors providing care as well. And every year it gets closer and closer to passing. So, that will be brought back up, the same legislation here in the state of Florida. And all they do is just mirror this same legislation. If we're not awake and thinking that somehow this isn't our issue, it has to be our issue. And I hope we sort of hit on later how there are effects beyond what's just happening to our trans community. And we can't be asleep at the wheel with this. We've got to be making sure our voices are heard, which is why, there are so many things we do at the Human Rights Campaign, asking folks to get involved legislatively, asking people to call and talk about these issues. What are you doing to take some personal responsibility to help stop these terrible laws? So let's just be clear about what all of this is. It's an assault on our youth, who are the most at risk anyways, and none of this legislation makes sense. And so it's really just disguised hate. And we know that. We see it over and over again. There's no rhyme or reason to explain that. You can't make this decision, but you could decide not to wear a mask. Women can't make decisions about their bodies, but we could decide this for you. It makes no sense. It's hypocrisy. We have to call it out. We can't fall for it. And I don't think people are falling for it. I think too many times people are just feeling like maybe it's not my issue and it has to be our issue, right? We have to all be involved in sounding the alarm. And I appreciate you all for doing that.
And I just want to make sure we don't forget the other side of that coin, which is the consequences and harm that occasions folks when we don't provide the care that they need and deserve. And, you look at a state like Arkansas that went there this year and attempted to and enacted a law that criminalized gender affirming care for trans youth. We're talking about care that is widely medically accepted. So American Academy of Pediatrics, American Medical Association, World Professional Association for Transgender Health, Fenway Health. So many, I'm going to listen to those folks rather than the party of a former president who told us to drink bleach in order to cure ourselves from coronavirus, right? Like, I'm going to listen to the doctors that are published, right? And so, what we saw in Arkansas was really scary, because after that bill passed, you got one provider, maybe two providers, primarily seeing every transgender youth that can get to them, and then that can afford independent healthcare, because it's not provided in any kind of state plans, right? And so the amount of calls for suicidal ideation, these are young people who have been receiving care, receiving pubertal blockers, receiving cross-sex hormones, flourishing, able to connect to other societal affirmations, school, community, etc. And the threat of regression, the canceling of appointments, the pulling back of opportunity, and what that did for those young people. And then you talk about the healthcare disparities, whether they be racial, whether they be rural, right? We're talking about care for young people, taking away care for young people who can't even get normal, regular pediatric care in the first instance in places like Mississippi and Arkansas and other places because of the disparity. So I just think it's important for us to also recognize the other side of that coin, because we're talking about young people and their families in an incredible amount of distress that, and we should be actually talking about what ways can we expand access to care generally and access to gender affirming care, not arguing with people who don't believe in science about what young people need to thrive and survive.
Absolutely. And we had a similar law introduced here in Tennessee that thankfully did not pass this year, but it will definitely be back next year. And a few years ago, we actually had a law that was passed where therapists and psychologists, they can turn away patients for religious reasons. And so just knowing that is already out, that, you know, that law is already out there. And then on top of that, the threat of this, in addition to, you know, you can't get mental health and then you're being denied, you know, just basic health care. It's crazy. The next myth that we wanted to break down is that there are only two genders, male and female.
Miss Tori.
All right.
Tell the people.
So I will first say, I believe in the power of okay. If there is someone who believes that there are two genders, okay. Here's another thing, Nick. I also believe that as humans, we don't have the ability to make people change their minds. Our responsibility is simply to provide people with as much information and education so that they could make the best decision for their own lives. With that being said, the concept of gender is a social construct that was created by white people, by white men more specifically, all right? Certainly, there are anatomical differences between folks who are assigned male at birth and female as their gender. There are anatomical and physiological differences between those folks, period. Now, with that being said, for us, many of us in our limited experience, to simply assume that no doctor makes a mistake, that in the human body and this human experience, that in our bodies, the same bodies, by the way, that makes almost no two people the exact same color. There's such a variety of skin, there's such a variety of skin tone and hair color that it is impossible for there to be some type of variety in gender. First, based on science, and then based on how people choose to identify or how people identify themselves. That's very, very small-minded. We know that here's a word, the hermaphroditic condition exists in all living species, that there are dogs, that there are cats, that there are flowers which have both pistils and stamens, for you science and science buffs.
Come on,
and so for us, again, to think that the human body is so insignificant that variation does not exist. It's absolutely mind-blowing, and it is limited. And you think like that loud minority of people who think, yeah, come on, biology. You think like those small-minded people, that loud minority of people who will attempt to dictate every single part of your life. Folks who don't have vaginas, who are telling people what they can do with their vaginas. Okay.
And I think it's important. You know, I'm gonna be vulnerable and transparent here as a cis male. You know, the gender binary is deep. I mean, it is deep. It is everywhere. And I have to, you know, as someone who works at an LGBTQ advocacy organization that represents trans and non-binary people as their attorney, you know, it's active work. I can't just rest on the grooves of my brain that have been dug over the 38 years that I've been, here, right? Like, it's deep, it's everywhere. It started from birth. I mean, you were told this versus that this thing is binary. You learned it in science, coming through school. You learned it in social studies. You learned it in English in terms of, pronoun usage and whatnot. And so, for those of us who don't have the direct experience, we have to be very conscious about consciously unlearning, exposing ourselves to the information, being in relationship with people that are different than us, and recognizing that it's something that is often written on us before we even understand it and realize it. So instead of, if you feel convicted, by what Tori shared and what is out there disrupting this notion of what you believe to be, just absolute sacrosanct. In fact, that's a good thing, right? But take that conviction and then incorporate it into your walk, because these people exist. You just didn't know about it.
Yeah. I was just going to say this. Tori, I'm with you. I agree we can't change minds. My goal is that we hopefully change some hearts and it leads some folks to changing their minds. Here's what's crazy, and I'm going to just put it out there. When I worked for the state of Florida, and I don't work for them now, so I could say this, they used to tell us as we would write stuff for the public, write it like you're writing it for a sixth grader. That was the education level in which we wanted to write our documents. Now, let me be clear, that's not judgment about folks who may have needed that, right? We should use plain language anyways. I can't stand being around folks using fancy language, because then I'm just like, why are you talking like that, right? We should speak in plain language. But what we don't talk about is we lack education around this, right? And so what's not being shared, and I do a little of this, I got to check my figures since last year, but 1 in every 1,666 births results in someone with an atypical chromosome pattern, not typical XX or XY, right? But we're not talking about that, right? We're barely getting basic education, especially if you grow up in certain neighborhoods that with folks that look like me or look like us on this call. So the idea that somehow we learn this basicness, when we call people basic all the time, too many of us are basic because we just stuck here and here when that doesn't fit science. Like, we already know there's a term we refer to people also as intersex, right? So even understanding that people don't fall necessarily one place or another, that sexuality, gender, all of those things can be fluid. So the fact that this isn't stuff we're making up, this is what we know. You can Google this the same way I tell white people who claim they want to do anti-racism work. I'm like, just Google. Those are basic facts that you can pull off the internet, that there are more than two genders. So sometimes I sit back and go, so you really don't want to know. You want to be ignorant. And that's the key that we're just saying. And when some folks who do not want to educate themselves show up, I just start being like, it's time for me to go, because you're not even trying to educate yourself. That is a myth. There are more than two genders, but I don't even want to give them a whole lot of energy on this. But part of the problem too is, like, this whole week I've been looking at this conversation around Dave Chappelle and some of the stuff that was said there. And I personally, I found him to always be funny, but I also see the harm caused by when we continue to do this, because folks who already don't want to educate themselves hear that and go, oh, Dave Chappelle said it, or this person said it, and sort of shut down. And so our key is like, how do we open those folks up? But some is a responsibility personally to be like, educate yourself. Tori didn't say anything that's not fact. You could just Google that, right? A basic Google from real resources, not the fake news resources. So that's why I just say these are basic things that people can learn on their own and that we should be teaching. But at least here, we're not going to let that ride. So if you're hearing our voices, please know that's a myth. Don't continue to perpetuate that.
Absolutely. And I have also, I've shied away from the Dave Chappelle conversation for the most part, but I've seen a lot of it on social media, and I've seen people saying, making excuses, which, he is a comedian, and people saying, well, he doesn't really, he cares about all people, or he wants rights for all people. But I mean, when you say things, or you call yourself, things like a turf. I mean, it's just completely contradictory. I don't know. I guess a lot of people are not familiar with that term, so they don't know, the meaning behind it. But it's definitely, I feel it's harmful. You said something a while back, Nick, that it sticks with me, and I probably quote it wrong, but I say it all the time now. You said, if we all fought for the rights of the Black trans woman, the world would be a much better place. And that is absolutely true. And it's something I say all the time now, all the time.
Yeah. No, please take it. I do believe that's true. If we're legislating with a Black trans woman in mind, please, I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me who gets left behind. I don't know anybody that gets left behind if we're legislating thinking about Black trans women.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, with that, I think that's a good segue into a call to action. What can we all do to get more involved, to help continue this conversation?
So there's a myriad of things that folks can do. So there's a great question also that I in the comments from the designer Williams. I love that name. That I hope we'll be able to address also about referring allies and supporting trans youth. So I think of it this way. Everybody has a role to play in eradicating stigma, in righting wrongs, in making for a more equitable union. And the reason I use equity versus equality is makes the assumption that we all start at the same place, and we don't. So equity means that folks who need the most get the most. And there are some folks who are great at carrying signs and marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, marching down Black Lives Matter Plaza. There's some people who are great at that, but there are also people who are much better at making the signs at 1640 Rhode Island Avenue so that the folks who are going to march can carry those signs. And then there are some people who are great at making the color that goes onto the signs that the other folks pick up and march down Black Lives Matter Plaza. And then there are some people who are much better at writing a check that buys the color that makes the billboards that the people take to Black Lives Matter Plaza in front of the legislators. And so whatever it is that you do it with gusto, do it the best that you can, do it with your entire heart and with the right intentions, because there's a role for everybody. You still may not get my transness, and that's okay. But it's simply because you don't understand my biological makeup, my story, doesn't mean that you can't support the eradication of stigma, the eradication of sexism, the eradication of transphobia, anti-trans violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, inequality and inequity. And so whatever it is that you do, maybe you're just the person who's good at making pies. Trans people, we love pies too. So make the hell out of some pies. Do whatever you do that pushes the movement forward.
Absolutely.
I would add too, people are, I'm representing, young people in issues that are cited in their school. Schools, school boards, they are just hotbeds right now. And I'm a lawyer by trade, but I'm an educator at heart. I taught high school in South Florida before I went to law school. And these are our babies in school. And, while these laws specifically are targeting our trans and non-binary youth, the harm that they're creating is affecting all young people in school. So if you have a young person in your life, if you're a parent, if you're a taxpayer, the most accessible form of government is around the corner and up the street. And you have a voice. You have a voice in these issues. And I would say particularly if you are a parent with power, if you are a parent of cisgender children, if you are a white parent, if you are a wealthier parent, You know, you need to make this your issue, just like every other issue in school, because this is having, you know, really, really terrible impacts for all kids in school. You know, our kids go to school, the educators, if they're doing their job, creating environments where everybody's feeling welcome, and that energy is what moves the ball forward. And we're talking about, you know, calculus and ecology and climate change and solving the problems of our country and our world. And what these folks are doing is regressive, talking about bathrooms and sports teams. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So when you sort of situate yourself there, you have power. And you, I think, you know, if you're looking at places to exercise it, think about your local school board, think about your local elected officials, because these parents and their children are isolated, and showing up and being there for them makes a big difference. I know it has for my client.
Yeah, I would just, first of all, my colleagues and friends said that better. I would just say this: there are a number of things that we can do. Number one, we continue to be a political organization. So many of these bad bills, again, bills coming forward because of our elected officials. So folks have to turn out at the ballot box. Number one, educating yourself and knowing which of these electeds, where they stand, holding them accountable, and if they're not doing the right thing, voting their asses out. That's just the truth. And you know, getting more people to run from like-minded communities, like, you know, Dacry, I'm looking at you, right? Like, I'm going, these are folks that we need to be grooming to be the next leaders, because these people currently in office don't speak for us. Like, where they're going with these laws don't even match the demands of the country and what the majority is asking for. So it's like we have this small minority ruling our country, and they just really loud. And so the idea is holding these folks accountable, and a lot of our work is political. And so how do we exercise that power? It's we the people. And if your electeds are not doing what you want, it's time to hold them accountable or vote them out of office. The other piece is we talked about it in the beginning, right? Passing the Equality Act. You know, check out hrc.org/the Equality Act. What are you doing to let or right? What are you doing to talk to elected officials? Forget even talking to elected officials. We forget, talk to your neighbors. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, like call out transphobia, call it out when you're seeing it happen. The other thing is, y'all, I'm not trying to hawk no merchandise, but I'll do this shirt because 100% of the proceeds from this shirt go to BTAG, which only supports, you know, Black trans organizations. So I just want to say this: there are organizations doing this work even beyond HRC. How are you showing up for them? What do we usually say? Y'all have heard me on here before. Time, talent, treasure, right? I will take all three, but I need at least one. And so how are you utilizing the resources that you have? The last thing I'll say is, it's hard to hate people up close. I keep telling folks, hating folks up close is really hard. So when I hear people saying, oh, they want to make a difference, they want to do this, I'm like, okay, who do you know in the community that's trans? Who's a close friend that you have? How are you educating yourself? Who are you around? Because again, when we don't understand stuff, that's how these lies continue. That's how people could tell you this stuff. Every person I run into, and y'all know I like to be on the ground in community, every time I meet someone who, I'll just be honest, I try not to judge, but you know, you see somebody you like, I know it's going to be a crazy conversation, and then it's not. Inevitably, I find out they're like, oh, I thought that until I knew such and such. And I got to know this, and I realized like that stuff we were saying and doing is wrong. Again, hard to hate people up close. Get people close to you in your life. Add people in who are different from yourself. Be open to hearing this stuff, and then get actively involved. Time, talent, treasure. I want all three, but we'll take one. But you can't do nothing.
Absolutely. I can't say how many times I've done phone banks or text banks and reached out to people and thinking that, you know, I was going to get a negative response. And so many people in Tennessee, that's usually who I'm reaching out to, they say that, you know, they weren't aware, but this is not the reason why they voted, you know, these people into office. And they really are upset. So I think just actually, you know, getting involved, speaking to your neighbors, speaking to your friends, speaking to your family. If if you have close coworkers, you have conversations like that, but speaking with them about it, and just spreading the message and getting them to write, to call, and keep calling, because there's no limit to how many calls. So I think that definitely is a way to get the message out, get people involved.
I'll just say this too. In a year where we had so many people, we lost a record number of people to COVID. I know I lost family members, that this is what they found most important, to worry about kids playing sports.
Right.
I don't even have words for that.
May I also add this? Because I would add to that the fact that folks are attempting to legislate how people pee and poop, when the truth is we just want to pee and poop in peace. Because if you are peering into if you are a cisgender person, if you're a cisgender woman and we're in a bathroom together and you're peeping into my stall to see what's between my legs, then you should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Whether I'm trans or not, it's ridiculous. And the fact to tie in a word that I see in the comment section about fear, they are attempting to use fear to further divide us. The spooky man in a dress in a bathroom is going to come and take you. Where the hell are we going to take you? To Mac? To Sephora?
And it's the same argument that's been used time and time again about the bathroom. It's always, you want to spark fear. I mean, it was used in the civil rights movement as far as, you want to keep us segregated. It's always surrounded, it's always about the bathroom or the water fountain or
the pool or, find some other space, right? But you're right, Daiquiri. I was just going to make that point. Like,
yes, it's a great point.
Yeah, it's always somewhere, right? It's always somewhere, and often it's always young people. How we're going to protect our youth? How we're going to protect our kids from this, unidentified, scary thing that this group of people or these people that I've identified, I claim to hold. Go ahead, Tori.
No, go ahead, Jason. I
was just going to say, as someone who was a classroom teacher, for several years, we have trouble with students in the bathroom, but this ain't it, right? There's a whole lot of stuff that happens that frustrates teachers and educators in the bathroom. And you know what we have? We have rules in place that do not discriminate against transgender students and faculty and staff, for that matter, as that bill does, that teachers and educators have used to make sure that shenanigans aren't going on in the bathroom. That's just something that educators know how to do. So I just wanted to throw that point out there. But go ahead, Ms. Tori.
So I'm 51 years old, and my parents were alive when it was illegal for them to go to school with white kids, because they said it, that integration. See, that's we think about integration in the sense of racial integration, but we don't think about integration and segregation when it comes to cis and trans. But it's the same type of thing. They said that having black kids going to school with white kids was going to damage the white community, the white race. That's the term they use. And so we have to think how we as Black people and as people of color, because Black and people of color are not necessarily the same thing, but we as Black and people of color have to remember that just a few years ago, that they were using these same techniques on our parents and on our grandparents. And, if you couldn't go to school together, then certainly you couldn't play sports against each other. But now it's illegal to not be able to discriminate against kids and say you can't go to school together. So now you just can't go to the bathroom together and you can't play sports together. And trans kids, in case anyone didn't know this, trans kids have always played sports with non-trans kids. It's always happened. Just wasn't a big deal until about 2 or 3 years ago.
For political reasons.
Right. Yeah, I've never seen a trans football.
That's real. And on top of that, who has not been to places with one bathroom? That's why I was always like, first of
Exactly.
all, growing up, my mama wouldn't even let my brother go to no other bathroom. You come right on in here with us. Let's not even go there. But how many places do we go and it was one bathroom? I travel all over the world. It's one bathroom that you use. It's no, depending on what country you are, where you are. So this idea that something so awful is going to happen, there's just no evidence of that. And it's absurd. So again, how often have you gone in? I think Family Dollar and stuff like that, Dollar General just start maybe getting 2 bathrooms. You used to go in them smaller stores, it's 1 bathroom. There wasn't nobody out there worried about who just went in there. Like, it's crazy.
Nick, sometimes there are 12 bathrooms, but I would put money on it that most of the women folk who are on this call at some point have used the man's bathroom because we take longer in the
Absolutely.
bathroom. There's a longer
The
line.
line be too long, right?
Yeah,
You're right.
so if
Hardly.
you, because you have to pee, go to a men's restroom or a stall that doesn't say women, let's say it that way, or ladies,
Right.
you could be arrested for that for the same type of idiocy. It's just stupid.
Well, they could have got me a few times. I try to run by the urinal and not be like, I ain't trying to see nothing. Let me pee in peace.
I also want to just share here too, like, I think it's always important to tell like the expressions of these stories. And we talk about like being older and going to a bathroom and, a restaurant or a store or something like that. I want to give you like the reality of my clients, right? I represent in Tennessee, a 6-year-old transgender girl. She is a girl in every other and recognized as such in every other aspect. Her teachers call her by her name, her feminine name. They use she and her pronouns. Her peers she's in first grade. Her peers have only known her to be a girl. So imagine my 6-year-old client, 9/10 of the day, being the girl that she is, recognized by her peers, her teachers, and in some cases, the state of Tennessee as a girl. And then for that one thing, using the bathroom, she's going to go to the boys' bathroom. That's your solution for this supposed, problem of bathroom exposure, right? It's to put a little girl who everyone understands, perceives, and treats like a little girl at that school. Every time she goes to the bathroom, she's a boy. Isn't that going to be confusing for every 6-year-old kid in that first grade? Isn't that going to be potentially damaging for every young person? Does that make any sense to anybody?
No.
Like, I think that those are it's important for us to sometimes like really understand the absurd application of these laws, certainly for the trans youth that they target, but really for youth generally. Doesn't make any sense.
It does, and I like the 13-year-old boy in Tennessee. He was saying that he stopped drinking at school just so he wouldn't have to go to the bathroom. Like, that's horrible. I mean, I have my son; he's 5, but I could only imagine if my son came home and told me something like that.
I hear those stories all the time from members of our trans community.
Yeah, and
they had a job at school.
Yeah, that was just like as normal as thinking about, did I do my homework? What classes do I have tomorrow? What assignments do I have down? Oh, how do I make sure I don't have to use the bathroom for 9 hours or 8 hours a day? Like, that's it's another thing on the list. And for us, it's just, when it doesn't affect you directly, when that's not your reality, you just can't, to Nick's point about proximity and knowing people and making yourself sort of understanding that these people exist. They're in your community, they're your neighbors, they shop, at the stores that you shop at. You have to stand up and acknowledge your own ignorance and then go out and get the information. And it don't cost you nothing to be compassionate. It really doesn't. And so to Tori's point, even if you can't get it through your thick skull that this is reality, that's another human being. That's a child in front of you that's just trying to go to school. Like, so if we can just start from there and exercise some basic human compassion, we can have something to, work with.
And this is again why the Equality Act is so very important. legal protections, and all public accommodations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I could just say this as well too, when I talked about earlier, you have to care, because it makes me think of the quote, y'all, I ain't gonna say who, but we've all heard it, where it's like, they came for this one and it wasn't me, so I ain't doing anything. They came for that one. By the time they came for me, nobody was left. I'm gonna say, even as we talk about that, not even when we don't think about who else tangentially is being affected by it, right? I have so many butch masculine friends who harass now going into a bathroom. So suddenly now, when it's happening to them, you got to now have, care and concern for members of our trans community who've been talking about these very issues for so long. So let's not also pretend we aren't trying to deal with the same transphobia in the rest of our rainbow community with the foolishness happening. So just remember, these same issues, when they're trying to regulate what happens to trans bodies, understand when they're coming to regulate women's bodies. So, we're all in this together, and this is the work we have to do together. Don't wait till they come for you to care.
Exactly. We have a question in the chat. Wasn't there a bill that required children to be physically searched?
I know that was part of the original Florida bill. It ended up I don't want to be careful quoting exactly. Some of that language was removed, but it was there very close to that bill being passed, that they were talking about they could physically search children to see. It was some foolishness, but that remained there. And I know that happened in my state where that was originally part of it. But even now, with the bill as the way it is, who would call that out, right? And so it was like, who could call it out and who would make the decision if you are or aren't, or whatever they were saying. The nonsense sometimes when we don't even walk through thinking about what would that look like. And I could just tell you how many parents will listen to this and watch this and think about, you get a call, somebody done search your child for something like that. It'll be so many cases. Like for real, let's be real about the numbers.
So can we also say what it is? Someone has inspected your child's genitals.
Yep.
Let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
If that's
not your child's genitals. And the step further, we already know who this was gonna come after. I'm always thinking about Serena Williams, right? They can't get enough of Serena body. Talking about black women's bodies. So this idea that someone could call out, are you, aren't you? And then they're going to do a body inspection. See, we have to connect the dots and understand again, this isn't about one issue. Who are they really targeting when they say this stuff? Who will really be impacted and affected? And we always know it's going to ultimately fall on us.
Right. And I do want to make a point, just, the question was about a bill that had in its operation and language, invasive physical checks of children when their eligibility to participate on particular sports teams was challenged by some third party. Now let's put all that together. Now that provision was taken out. That bill was Idaho in 2019. So that bill got enjoined pretty quickly because the judge was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. And so these people, and I say these people because it's the same cadre of people spreading this hate wherever they feel like they can sow it and sell a couple of legislators down the river for I don't know how much money to introduce these bills and advance them in their respective states. So they took that out because they were like, all right, like that, we went a step too far. We gave them too much in terms of what this is going to actually look like. And you could see the crazy right on the paper. So instead, they put this device in there. They were like, all right, state officials, school district people, we're going to take y'all out of it generally. We're going to throw the rock of discrimination, and then we're going to hide the hand of responsibility. Because we're going to say, well, the only people who have opportunity to enforce this is the public, the citizens. They can bring lawsuits if they feel like someone's playing on a team that they shouldn't be playing on. If they feel like that's not actually a biological female, as they've termed. So now, we're starting to put this together. Now they're basically saying on the front end, we're gonna curry up all this fear and misinformation about trans people, trans women and girls specifically. We're going to build fear that they're taking away something that is your right. And then on the back end, we're going to incentivize you to bring a lawsuit anytime you think that somebody. So to Nick's point, these are drafted around and curry in white supremacist notions of femininity. So whether you are trans or not, right, and we've seen this in Florida, women who don't conform to that specific identification of what a woman's body should look like, what femininity is, are getting targeted, not by a school official, not by a state official, but by a parent on the other team, right? Who's like, harassment on the field, right? Bad behavior generally, and the potential to then subject someone's identity to a lawsuit by someone who just says, hey, like, you ain't who you say you are, or you shouldn't be here, right? That's what's happening on the ground. And when we talk about why this has a particular impact on Black and brown women, is because who is generally targeted for not fitting into, white supremacist notions of femininity. And that's not conjectural. We're seeing those stories happen on the ground right now, and they are the natural consequence of taking this kinds of action, because certain people behave poorly when it comes to women's sports generally. So now they just got more fuel to continue to do that. Is it going to harm trans women and girls? Absolutely. But there are more cis women and girls playing sports actively right now. So there are going to be more harm to those folks in terms of active players, because they're the ones who are on the field, right? And we're trying to draw in and create more opportunities for trans women and girls. So yeah, it has that harm, but it also has this other harm for this, all of these women and girls who are currently playing to face the kind of targeting that these laws instigate.
Can we also bring into the space, if I may offer, the misogyny and the sexism that's involved in this as well? Because these are quite often old, white, cisgender, heterosexual men who are past their prime, who are saying that trans women are going to beat their little girls at sports. They're not talking about trans men competing with other boys. Trans boys, and they're not having that conversation. They're being very, very specific. Again, dictating how a woman is supposed to be, how her body is supposed to be, and how she should exist in the world. That's pure misogyny at its root.
It is. We had, I think that's all the questions that we have in the chat box. If anyone has any questions that they didn't get answered, we can definitely take those down and then take them offline and get some answers. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up tonight and let you guys enjoy the rest of your evening and night. I want to send a huge thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight. This has been an incredible discussion, and I've enjoyed every second of it. I truly have.
I want to tell you thank you. What Daiquiri's not saying, Daiquiri's one of our governors on the Board of Governors and is outstanding. We appreciate all of your contributions and the work we're able to do with Betas. We're excited about this work, and we'll continue to keep pushing this forward and supporting you all. But Daiquiri, thank you for all you continue to do.
Thank you for being such a gracious host, Daiquiri. I'm taking a picture to commemorate this evening. But thank you for being such a gracious.
You got my shirts.
Yeah, buy the shirt.
Yes.
Buy this shirt. Okay. Good night, you all.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.
Good night. Y'all be blessed.